today I don't plan to do that. So, hi, welcome everybody. I'm Leslie. I'm just gonna, God wants it that way. And before I get started, I do want to have the caveat is that I am not here as an official representative of the Methodist Church. I am here as a person just like you. I just happen to have a love of theology and Bible history and everything. And Jason, says, I say, hey, I think I have a message. And he's like, great, let's put the date. So and that was kind of where we are today. I think it's also important that you understand, at least my spin on things, the perspective that I bring to this. So I am definitely coming in today, stepping back into sort of my more feminist take on the Bible. So I am coming in here with the assumption that sometimes there are powerful female stories that we can draw from that may be buried within the text. And then actually today I'm drawing from one that's not in the Bible, but that's kind of tangential to the Bible, that was passed around in Christian scriptures, that is probably more well known with the Roman Catholic and the Eastern Orthodoxy Church than it has been in the Protestant Church. So I'm wanting to bring light to that and then draw from that things that we can draw from in our today. But definitely coming in with that lens. I want to be very honest with the lens that I bring to the table. So I'd like to start with saying that, today as I'm going to be talking about a piece of, I'm going to call it scripture from the early church. It dates back to probably 176, the 170s CE, called the Acts of Paul and Thecla. And it comes from a larger text called the Acts of Paul, which is not in our canon of the Bible. And I think it's also important to note that the biblical canon probably was not set until the 4th century CE. So these were scriptures and things that were passed around that were very meaningful to people in the area that I think it's important for us to look at, consider, and redraw from as we try to take back what truly was the message of Christ and that we heard. And as I was reading this and reintroduced to this, it occurred to me that it's kind of like a Christian fairy tale. But a fairy tale in the true sense. Before the Brothers Grimm came to fairy tales, fairy tales were ways that women passed on knowledge to their mothers, passed on knowledge about the world to their daughters. When I was in graduate school, I had a lot of time on my hands. I was like a numerical modeler programmer, so I would write these programs and then I would have 30 minutes for it to run before I could get data. So it was a lot of downtime before I saw if the program would run and I would get data. So I actually dove into fairy tales, and there's a great website, I think from the University of Pittsburgh or Penn State, that has all these old collections of them. And when I was reading them, I was like, wow, these are awesome. These are females not being rescued by the prince at the end, right? That's just the cherry on top, but that went through their own adventures. And, mothers were passing on very deep and meaningful wisdom to their daughters, mostly in ways of protecting themselves from evil men. Sorry, guys. I don't hate everyone, but let's just say it was protecting the virtue. And in some ways, I feel like this tale of Thecla is that. So let me introduce Thecla to you. I had never heard of her until I started reading a book called The Mary Magdalene Revealed. Or I think I had heard of her because I'd seen a random YouTube video, but then she came up in the book, and I was just startled once again by this female heroine in the 2nd century. Well, from this writing from the 2nd century, but they're certainly talking about a woman or writing about a woman who would have been contemporary with Paul. Anybody else heard of her? I don't know. Am I just bringing in? No. Okay. All right. So our story starts in Iconia. I think I'm saying that right. Iconium, a town in Rome. I have no idea. I should have looked it up where it was, but I didn't. And Paul is invited in by a wealthy merchant of the area to come in and speak, and he sets up in this merchant's home. I'm thinking kind of in a more like a patio area. And listening is this woman, Thecla, who is also from a very wealthy household and has been promised in marriage to another guy. But she is so struck with Paul's message of Jesus and Christ that she listens at the window for 3 days, not eating, not drinking, just enraptured by what Paul says. And when I was looking at the lectionary for today and the Song of Solomon quote came in, I almost imagine like there's this almost sexual tension that's there in there, not from woman to man, but woman to wisdom, right? Woman to something that could be. So early, if we kind of build this around, virginity was very, was it sought after? I don't know, like prized. Partly because, like, you know, if you were doing everything from the patriarchal, like if it was a patriarchal society, the only way that you could be completely, absolutely sure that the baby that the woman carried was yours is that you protect them before and after marriage. And I almost feel like that being kind of a chain. Now, let me be very clear. Paul, one of his messages was not just being virgin, but no sex, nobody, anytime. Just don't do it. If you really have to, get married and do it, but only do it when you really have to. So I am not advocating for that. But I do wonder if this woman who felt trapped and enraptured into this arranged marriage saw a seed of hope, of freedom. Like, I can do this thing. I can go off. I can be something different from what my family wants me to be. And so I do see her, right, at this window, falling in love with a message of love, with a message of a different life than she had ever thought for herself, and passing that law of love on to other people. So there she is at the window. And her mother being very worried about her, that she's not going to marry this wealthy man, which could also mean wealth for their family, like multiplying the wealth of their family. She goes to find the fiancé. The fiancé tries to woo her out of the window and back to him, and he is unsuccessful. So what do, I don't know, patriarchal men do in the time? They then resort to manipulation and bullying. So he sends out his thugs to go and listen to what Paul's saying, and they're like, I can't believe, you won't believe what he's talking about. He's telling men don't have sex with their wives, and women don't have sex with your husbands, and, you know, we can't stand for this. So he ends up having Paul arrested for, throwing off society's mores. And Thecla takes it upon herself to take all of her goods, her bracelets, her clothes, her jewelry, and she bribes the guards, almost as though she's casting off her former self. She bribes the guards so that she can go in and sit at the feet of Paul and learn more about Jesus. And then while she's there, her fiancé comes in to take Paul to the tribunal and sees her there. So they are both taken to the tribunal. Well, as you may know, Paul gets cast out of the city, right? Never to become again. The merchant who housed him actually sells all his things and goes with Paul. But Thecla is once again asked to cast this off and to marry her husband or her fiancé. And when she wouldn't, her mother, her own mother, says, burn the wicked wretch. Burn in the midst of the theater her that will not marry, in order that all the women have been taught by this man may be afraid. So her own mother turns against her and tells her to be burned. And I think about in our lives, when we're in that space where we are doing something a little bit counterculture, a little bit off-center from what was society, but we know is good, but then society is like, no, you can't do that. And so, there's this backlash. And I think we see this here in Thecla's mother. So she is stripped naked. She is tied to the post. They bring the wood, the things that are going to light the fire, and they light the fire. But what happens is not only can the fire not touch her, and Thecla prays to Jesus, try and save me, and a storm actually comes up and puts the fire out, right? So she is saved, and she gets clothes. She doesn't run off just naked, but I'm assuming, it doesn't say in the story. I'm assuming. They gave her clothes, she goes off and she finds Paul. And then she begs Paul, but I'm ready to be baptized, baptize me now. And she cuts off her hair, because I think that's what we do when we want to say, screw this society, I'm going to chop off all my hair. I always feel like it's a Mulan thing, where she gets the sword out and she cuts off her hair. That's what's in my head. But Paul says no, and I will say there's a little bit of thing where it almost seems like Paul's a little afraid. This is a beautiful woman of consequence. I think he's almost afraid of what could happen if she is, following him. But he takes her on, but says, no, not yet, be patient. So they go to another city, and what would happen, but let's say the mayor of the town, the big head honcho of the town, spies her, falls instantly in love with her, and says, stops everything, I am going to have her. And when she rebucks him, he tries to insinuate himself on her in the middle of the town square where everybody can see. So she escapes him, rebukes him in front of everybody, takes off his crown, throws it away. Now you can imagine he is not well pleased by these actions. So he has her, he sentences her to be put in the arena with all the wild beasts. She is taken into the household of a wealthy female who had lost her daughter, so almost has an adopted mother who kind of takes her in and protects her from having to go into the jails, right? So she protects her virginity or her modesty. But the next day she is brought into the arena with the wild beast. And they have a lioness, a lion, and bears. They release them to her. Well, the lioness, and it is very specific in here, the lioness in the story lays by her feet, licks her feet, and will not let any other animals approach her. Protects her. So the bear comes up and the lioness kills the bear. And then the lion comes and the lioness and the lion fight to the death. So they both die. And then Thecla spies. And I will say, at this whole time, the women of the village are incensed. From the moment that she was sentenced, they were saying, evil judgment. They are incensed with this mayor guy. Evil judgment. This is not fair. And then when they see the lioness protect her from everything, they're like, still, no, this cannot happen. And so Thecla sees this pool of water, and the women try to tell her, don't go in the pool. There are flesh-eating seal, and I don't know why they're flesh-eating seal in there, but they're flesh-eating seal and don't go in the pool. What does she do? She runs into the pool. She says, I baptize myself in the name of Jesus, and falls in the pool, and a column of fire erupts around her, protecting her, hiding her nakedness, and the seals, the man-eating seals, are struck dead by a thing of lightning. Okay, and still the magistrate, the mayor, is not to be had. So he throws in more wild beasts, and at this point, the women of the village have had it. They start throwing in lavender and nard and all this sweet stuff and put the animals to sleep. So it's almost like not only has this woman found a seed within her and has stuck by it and has let it grow, but that spark within her has sparked the care, the concern, the seeds, the divine in all the women around the village who see this injustice. And so they act by throwing in these sweetened stuff to put the animals to sleep. But the mayor is still like, no, she is going to die. So he orders his men to tie her to 2 bulls and have the bulls run in opposite directions. And before they could do that, a column of fire still protects her and burns the rope. And I think it's at that point. And then I think the lady who took her in was a queen, and she fainted, and everybody thought she had died at the sight of this. And so the mayor, being afraid of what the Romans would find out about this and his evil deeds, said, all right, enough is enough. So she is finally let go. She is adopted by the queen, who gives her all the riches that she needs and clothes. She's clothed back again. She sells most of it for the poor, and she goes off and she goes with Paul, having baptized herself. And to me, I think that's the crux of the story. That even though we may feel like we need somebody else to validate us, that we need somebody else to say, you are holy, I do think there's a part of Jesus' message that was there to re-spark the divine in us, to find that thing within us and have the courage to baptize ourselves with that, to use that inner wisdom, that inner guidance, to tap into that, to guide our path. It's okay, connect with people outside us, find your people, but be guided by that and not be afraid to to baptize yourself, to take that power amongst you, right? Before you go out. So then, Paul does a lot, he then brings her in, really sees that she is an apostle, and sends her out to also preach. And I will say that the story does continue where she does preach. She eventually finds a cave where she sort of lives out her life as an ascetic, as a hermit. I will say there's 2 versions of the ending. And you'd think, so at 9, she she lives for another 72 years. So as a 90-year-old woman, she is in this cave and she is healing all the people so much that the doctors have no work. So still these men try to come and say, who is she? She's connecting with Artemis. She's doing all this stuff that we normally do, and we need to go and get her. And I hear that she's a virgin, so let's just go and defile her. And so they do arrive, and still she just kind of brings them in, allows them to come in, treats them with kindness, but then prays to Jesus to save her, and an opening in the rock appears just enough for her, and she slips by and escapes them. So even at 90, she was making waves into the society where she was. And both endings do have her going to where Paul was last seen, learning of his death, and then she lays down and they say goes to sleep. So they don't use the word death because they believe in the resurrection, that there is life beyond this life, and has been known to be buried with him. And thus ends the story of Paul and Thecla. So I highly recommend going out. Don't take my word for it. Do your own research, please. So what I take from this, right, is that here's the thing that's in my head. So in Genesis, they talk about with the Adam and Eve story that God breathed his breath into Adam, right? If there's a truth to that, I think the truth is this, that God has breathed the divine spirit in all of us, right? No matter where we come from, no matter our background, no matter what trials have come to us, no matter what we think of ourselves, you have a spark of the divine within you. And when I think about the growth parables that you had today, which is why I had you read all 3 of them, right? I think there's a reason why Jesus did not really come out. He very rarely said, do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that. Do not let anybody tell you otherwise, right? There are very few instances where he was like, this is it. Where we get a lot of the rules come from history, and they come from society, they come from Rome, right? But they don't come from Jesus. He would say, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, visit the prisoners, but he very rarely said other than that, outside of that. But what he did when he talked about the kingdom of heaven, he never said this is what it is. He talked in parables. And that's why I like that thing of Matthew, and the things are like, why are you telling us these in parables? Why can't you just say what it is? Because he knew that he couldn't. That it had to do with being able to bring you into a story truth. A truth that transcends literal truth. A truth that transcends, it's wisdom truth. Truth with a capital T. And that's not easily said. It's experienced. It's metaphorical. It's poetic. And those 3 parables in particular, they kind of fall under what's called the growth parables. And there's a trend. And I wanted to have all 3 because sometimes Jesus will talk in 3s, and he's showing 3 different perspectives of the same story. And here we see the story of the growth of the weeds within the wheat. And he's like, no, let them be. And what the miraculous part in that is not that there are weeds there, but that even among the weeds, the wheat growth is humongous. It's miraculously large. Right? It's almost as though some of those wheats became weeds, right, through the tending of the garden. And he talks about the mustard seed, but really the mustard plant may be normal mustard plant is about my height. It's not huge. It's not a tree. But he's talking about a parable of a small seed that miraculously grows into something huge that birds can nest on, that allows for other things to find respite and to find care and to find growth. And then he talks about the yeast, which some Jewish culture, there's times when they don't have the leaven, right? The yeast can be thought of, I wouldn't say evil, but not necessarily great, right? Impure. So now we have something that's impure, but that allows for not just some of the flour to be consumed, but all of it to be consumed. And in other parables, it talks about it's 1,000-fold. It's beyond, it's magnanimous. And when I see the story of Thecla and stories like this, I'm seeing a seed of hope get sprouted within somebody and take root. And as she grows in that knowledge, and she grows in her spiritual knowledge and in her wisdom, she sparks it in other people. And that to me is the message. That's the miracle. That as we become wise within ourselves and we become loving within ourselves and want to share that love with other people, we are then allowing the kingdom of heaven to be created on earth because we are part of that. We are doing it by our deeds. We're doing it by our love. We're doing it by, when we show love to somebody else. And I just think it's awesome and miraculous that this comes from a 2nd century woman. Right? Even if the story was just written in the 2nd century, think about that. Right? In a society where women were marginalized and thought of as property, there were still women who were fighting the good fight, who were out there, who were saying, yes, I can also be a preacher. I can baptize myself because I know what is right, and I'm going to fight through that. And we tend to take historical women, we paint them with this one brush. But even in 2nd century, there were women, there were people who were going a little bit counterculture to do what was right and good. So I guess if you take nothing from this, know that it starts with love and the courage to learn and lean in to that love. Amen. Thank you. Amen.